Hello, everyone. Welcome to this special event, really. This is a real treat for me and for all of you to have these four panelists who are, I can't really think of four better people to talk on this issue. So, yeah, the format is going to be that each speaker is going to have 8 to 10 minutes to present on their topic. Then there's going to be a 20-minute panel discussion, and then we'll put it out for questions to the audience. So just a few introductory remarks. Firstly, welcome on behalf of the main organizers of this event, who are All Books, the publisher, the Cordoba Foundation, and the Muslim Community Association. Also, thanks to supporting organizations, the Together Coalition and the European Network on Religion and Belief. There is also a demonstration against the far right on the 28th of March in central London, which is organized by the Together Coalition. Just now, I wanted to invite Musaddiq Ahmad, who's Secretary of the Muslim Community Association, to say a few words from the mic.
Hi, good evening, everyone. So I just got 1 minute, so I got to be very brief. Honorable Chair, distinguished guest, respected member of the audience. As an organizer, it's a pleasure to welcome everyone on behalf of Muslim Community Association, for short we say MCA, and to celebrate the launching of Peter Owen's new book, Complicit, Britain's Role in the Destruction of Gaza. Writing a book is a remarkable achievement that reflects dedication, creativity, passion for sharing idea, and in this case, a great courage. I personally love reading Peter's book. I attended 2 of the previous book launch, and I look forward to buy his new one. I warmly congratulate Peter on this accomplishment and wish him every success with the book. Thank you all.
Yeah, I'll just make some comments on Peter's book and Peter generally. There was an article written by the group Media Lens, which some people might know, a couple of years ago, and it was titled The Impossibility of Peter Owen. And this article really, I think, got across how special Peter is, because he's a figure who, for many, many decades, worked within the mainstream media for publications like The Spectator and the Daily Telegraph, but then took a principled stand over, I think it was HSBC and their role in the Daily Telegraph, and then went into alternative media and has completely revolutionized, really, and had a huge impact on alternative media with his analysis of foreign policy, his analysis of Israel's crimes in Gaza, the British role. And we're lucky to have Peter, because he's a singular figure. There's basically no one else like him. And I used to edit his articles at Declassified UK, and you could tell that he worked in the media for 40 years because you barely needed to touch them, which was always nice for an editor. So thank you to Peter for his stand as well, because if you come from that community, and that establishment media, you put your head above the parapet if you start saying the things that Peter said, and he is widely attacked for his brave journalism. So it's very lucky that we've had him. Also, his book is now going to be the go-to book that catalogues the role of the British media, particularly, and the British state and their complicity in the destruction of Gaza, which is a historic crime. One of the worst things many of us have ever seen. So that is a major, major service to the historical record, and this book will last. So thank you, Peter. I'll just introduce the panelists first. So up first will be Laleh Khalili, who is a professor of Gulf Studies at the University of Exeter. Her books include Sinews of War and Trade, Shipping and Capitalism in the Arabian Peninsula, Heroes and Martyrs of Palestine, The Corporeal Life of Seafaring, and most recently, Extractive Capitalism, How Commodities and Cronyism Drive the Global Economy. Next up will be Jeremy Corbyn, who is not here yet, but will be arriving shortly. Probably needs no introduction, but is an independent MP for Islington North, co-founder of Stop the War Coalition and former leader of the Labour Party. He is also the founder of the Peace and Justice Project. Then we have Peter Oborne, who is associate editor of Middle East Eye and a columnist for Byline Times and Declassified UK. He has worked as a political editor of The Spectator and political columnist for the Daily Mail and Daily Telegraph. He is the author of numerous books, most recently the new Sunday Times bestselling Complicit, Britain's Role in the Destruction of Gaza. Then we have Anas Al-Takriti, who is CEO and founder of the Cordoba Foundation and former president of the Muslim Association of Britain. He is a patron of the Stop the War Coalition and co-chaired the historic 2 million person strong march against the Iraq War in London in February 2003. Just before I introduce Professor Khalili, I'll just talk a little bit about my experience covering this topic, because I've stopped now, but for 2 years of genocide, I was covering the British role. And what became clear to me during that reporting was that actually, and this isn't a criticism of the title of Peter Oborne's book, because Britain is also complicit, but in terms of military and intelligence support, Britain was a major participant in the genocide in Gaza. And that's a big claim, but it can be qualified, because if I tell you that a power is giving intelligence, sending spy planes over an area which is being attacked by another power in a genocidal war with hourly war crimes committed, and they're handing that intelligence to that power, to their military in real time, that makes you a participant. And that's not me saying that, that's lawyers say that, legal experts. And that was happening until October last year, every day, and basically was not covered at all by the mainstream media. And if that had been covered by the mainstream media, if the central role that Britain played in the destruction of Gaza had been covered by the mainstream media, there may have been pressure to stop it. Because the one thing the media did cover when they talked about UK complicity was the arms. 2024, the Labour government suspended 29 arms licenses of 350. But that wasn't the main role that the British played. In fact, in terms of arms, we're a minor player. The major role we played was the intelligence support, and that was never covered by the media. So the government, and it wasn't just the Labour government, by the way, this started under the Conservatives. But in my opinion, and I don't think it's too extreme to say this, all the ministers that ordered those spy flights, that ordered this intelligence to be gathered over Gaza that was going directly to the Israeli military in real time, should be investigated and I think prosecuted by The Hague. It's an open, I've talked to lawyers who say it's an open and shut case. And it's very interesting actually with this whole Manderson saga, which is kicking off at the moment, which shows how consent is manufactured amongst the population, because of course this is a major scandal and I hope it does bring down Keir Starmer, and it looks like it will. But really what should have brought down Keir Starmer, and should have brought down Rishi Sunak before, is participating in genocide. And this is a major way the media propagandizes, by where they put emphasis. There's no emphasis at all on that participation, so there's no pressure. But there's all this pressure over Mandelson, and it shows the power of the media if they actually do their job. So hopefully, this is obviously work of years and years and years, but hopefully at some point we will get accountability, and no one can drop the ball on this, because this was a crime of such epic proportion, which continues, which our leaders were participants in, and they need to face justice. So first up, Professor Khalili will speak on Britain's historical complicity with the colonization of Palestine.
Good evening. It's an incredible honor to be here, in part because Peter Oborne has been somebody whose work I've admired for a very long time. And this book, and I say this as an academic, is incredibly well researched. It is beautifully written, and it is damning, if one can say. So I was asked to speak about the historic complicity of Britain, and indeed, not just complicity, but complete and total involvement of Britain in the depredations in which Israel engages. And I began with the question of, why is it that this small little country on the Mediterranean, something that I rather impolitely describe as a shitty little settler colony on the Med, has become such a central axis of support for so many different states in the global north? And I thought that maybe the way to go about this is to talk a little bit about the history of why Israel was established as this shitty little settler colony on the Med. Basically, it's really significant that the moment at which settlement in Palestine began at the end of the 19th century was also an incredibly important moment in British imperialism, French also, but British imperialism in particular, all around the globe. At the end of the 19th century, the British were sending Cecil Rhodes out to southern Africa. There were settler colonies being established kind of anachronistically in all sorts of other places. There were huge amount of imperial buildup. There was a huge amount of imperial buildup that was happening in lots of other locations, including in India, the Middle East, and elsewhere. And so in some ways, this sending of settlers to Palestine was in part about setting up an imperial beachhead in an area which was very important to the British Empire, the Middle East, on the Mediterranean, at the heart of what was then still the Ottoman Empire, but also very significantly, halfway between Britain and its empire in India. But it was also a solution to fissures at home. I mean, Zionism is actually an anti-Semitic project, because when it started in this country, it was basically intended as pushing the Jews out of this country and settling them somewhere else. So it was, many of the sort of the posh supporters of the Zionist project were actually anti-Semites. If you go back to even further back, I'm sure a lot of you guys have read George Eliot's, the great writer of the Middle March. She's also got a book called Daniel Deronda, which is about Zionism. And it is one of the most deeply anti-Semitic things you'll ever read about, and it has some of the most horrific cliches about British Jews in it that you can imagine. So those two things were always hand in hand with one another. In any case, the British helped set up the settlements in Palestine. And then, of course, the Balfour Declaration, which you all know, which emerges in 1917 and promises a homeland to the Jews in Palestine, and basically doesn't really mention the Palestinians at all. Over the course of the mandatory period, the time that the British had control over Palestine, they basically trained the military forces of the settler community. There's a really great film out there called Palestine 36, if you watch it. It's about Major Wingate going out there and conducting night raids. But Wingate was also one of the people that, for example, taught Moshe Dayan how to fight. So there was a direct military connection between the British and this sort of the Yishuv, the Jewish community pre-Israel in Palestine. But so many other elements of what is today Israel's repressive measures actually were invented and brought in by the British there. The administrative detention laws, for example, which can hold Palestinians without any trial for 6 months and then can get extended and then can get extended and it can get extended, was actually a British importation. The walls that were built were actually first built by the British or designed by the British, and they were built by the union, the Jewish Union in Palestine, with material imported from Mussolini's Italy. The collective punishment, which is something that is constantly inflicted on Palestinians by the State of Israel was something that the British excelled at during that period in Palestine and elsewhere. And all of this was incorporated into Israeli law and practice. Now, really, until the moment at which Israel ends up becoming the direct US gendarme in the region in 1967, the British was really the largest protector of Israel. But in 1967, the major war happens, during which Israel occupies the West Bank, Gaza, East Jerusalem, Golan Heights, and Sinai. And the US thinks, well, hey, we've got somebody here who can fight on our behalf. About 20 years later, Alexander Haig, who was then in the US cabinet, basically describes Israel as the United States' largest stationary aircraft carrier in the world. So Israel always served this function as a kind of a military outpost, as a kind of a settler colonial, as Herzl himself described it, bulwark against the Asiatic hordes. This was a terminology he used to describe what Israel could be. It was always intended as a kind of a strategic foothold for the empire, whether it was the British first, the French for a very short period, and then the Americans. But the question now is, why is it that this anachronistic settler colony on the Med is still so significant? Well, one thing that we can see is that basically it functions as a regional gendarme. Over the course of the last 2 years, in addition to the genocide it has waged against Palestinians in Gaza, the continued repression in the West Bank and East Jerusalem, the expulsion of Palestinians, the destruction of their habitats, so much that is going on, so much that is happening to Palestinians. In addition to all of that, Israel has actually bombed 7 countries in the region. It acts as a disciplinary body to keep everybody in line, on the one hand militarily, and secondly, and significantly, also to economically de-develop them. Empire functions when you have de-developed countries that don't have the possibility of pushing back economically. Most of these places have been bombed to smithereens. Plans for partition are constantly put forward, including recently in the Jerusalem Post for Iran, which is kind of laughable given that Iran's borders were established long before the United States even existed. So these elements of basically keeping the region in hand has been very significant. Another element that makes Israel so significant is, of course, that it's Praetorian industrial production. This is a site of producing surveillance software. It's a site of producing armament and other kinds of repressive and punitive and kinetic weapons that can be used by everybody else. The ridiculous wall that Trump is building in between the United States and Mexico has Elbit Systems functioning as part of the sort of the contractor bodies there. Elbit is also helping Frontex here in Europe to protect its borders from migrants. So in some ways, Israel functions as this kind of a Praetorian industrial factory for all of the Europeans. As an academic, I'd be remiss not to mention that Israel has been incorporated into the European scientific, cultural, political construction of Fortress Europe. When you apply for funding from the EU, you'll find, if you go and look at any of the statistics, Israel receives far more funding than proportionally it really is need to, it's supposed to, or the quality of its work indicates. So there is this particular way in which Israel is constantly incorporated into this northern, global north, European American system of rule. And finally, Israel is, of course, a significant extension of US domination through extreme violence in the region. And given that the UK is basically, in its post-imperial time, has been United States poodle, its complete and total acquiescence to the United States has translated into this kind of a support, including the kind of intelligence overflights that Matt was talking about. At the same time, domestically, Britain is barely a second-rate power. The Thatcherite transformation sees a decline in systemic dissent against the state. And what dissent there is being criminalized. And there's independent reporting is being destroyed, whether at local or international level, which is part of the reason why both Peter and Matt's work is so significant in this regard. There's independent reporting, not beholden to those in power. And finally, the Labour Party, with a few honorable exceptions, has always been very pro-Zionist. What we now see, however, is complete and total closing of ranks among the major policymakers and politicos of the right and the center around Israel. But this is not just the case in the government. There is a massive democratic deficit in every institution. In every institution, the rank and file want freedom for Palestine. The leadership kill that. If you look at The Guardian, their rank and file reporters would love to be able to say stuff about Palestine. Their reporters, no way. In universities, the students and the staff would love to be able to say things to support Palestinians, but they're repressed. In arts institutions, the artists and the institution watchers or consumers would love to be able to see more Palestinian stuff, but those who run those institutions, the festivals, the museums, actually foreclose that possibility. We need to address this democratic deficit in our own institutions. And so look around you and see who you're working with, in which institutions you're working, and demand on their democratization. I think Peter's work in this regard is really important. He shows how complicity happens. He shows how complicity happens at the very highest level, but also in the press. And I think we should also look for these forms of complicity everywhere we do our work. Thank you very much.
Well done, fantastic, fantastic.
Thank you very much for that brilliant talk. Next up, we have Peter Oborn, who will speak about the role of the media and the media's complicity in the destruction of Gaza.
Well, thank you very much indeed. Wonderful, wonderful speech, Leila. And I want to make a few thoughts. Yes, hello. Can you hear me? Yeah. To say, first of all, it's very lovely to be back here because my last book, The Fate of Abraham, was launched at the East London Mosque, which I really appreciated, and had a fantastic turnout, and it's wonderful to be back here. I will accept in the spirit it's intended that I am a brave journalist, but there's no, it's nothing if you think about the predicament of Palestinian journalists, more than, more than well over 200 of them have been killed, many targeted and by Israel, and many of their families targeted by Israel, to almost complete silence. Failure to protest in the mainstream British media. We're talking at a very extraordinary moment in British politics. It is, and indeed global politics. What we see, the Epstein affair, the Epstein files, they're very like WikiLeaks in a way. WikiLeaks showed the what US foreign policy really was. It kind of decoded the difference between the official position of American foreign policy and the real one. But the Epstein one is showing how the world is really governed. It's very by super rich. And at the end of this, we have moved clearly in the West from a system of democracy to a system of oligarchy. And at the end of what I'm going to say tonight, I'm going to examine the comparisons between the reasons for complicity, media and political complicity with the what most people now regard, most experts regard as a genocide in Gaza, with what we are now learning about the way politics is truly conducted, because we can see behind the scenes now through these emails who is really running our politics, our country, and of course the United States as well. I mean, Wes Streeting, whose constituency isn't very far from here, he said a few days ago that the Mandelson business had discredited all politics. Well, it's a pity. I was planning to make this remark when Jeremy Corbyn was here, because he hasn't discredited all politics. It's a justification, of course, an enormous justification for the politics of Jeremy Corbyn. And but it does show how the main political parties, the Labour Party, the Conservative Party, and of course Reform, which is part of the same moneyed system. You'll see the presence of Farage in the UAE at the moment, or just come back, that has and I'm going to go look at the significance of this in terms not just of Epstein, but of Gaza. The media has certainly been discredited by Gaza, and it's just worth looking at its role, which has really been three stages. Stage one was full-blooded support, blooded being a relevant word, for the cross-party coalition, the cartel politics which evolved immediately after 7th of October. And the two main parties merged. They were joined by the Reform and the far right, the violent right, the Tommy Robinson right. And the media came in behind that, and it was doing its principal task was atrocity denial, and that is the way that it just failed to report what Israel was doing. Atrocity propaganda, for instance, the reporting of the 40 dead babies and all that. And then when it was this was all disproved, the failure to note that they were disproved. Quite most of the front pages are actually still, you can still find them up online even. And then of course a omission of key factors which enabled an understanding, would have enabled readers or viewers to understand. The Dahia doctrine was at the heart of what Israel was doing, and it had been formulated, it had been first discussed and practiced in 2006 in South Lebanon, and then it was brought to bear in Gaza, and there was no education. There was no education from the media. It wasn't mentioned on the BBC at all. I mean, Hannibal Directive, which crucial for understanding what happened on October the 7th, when Israel was killing its own people quite deliberately. It was just not, we didn't learn about it. I think Richard Sanders is in the audience. I might have spotted him, and his film about October the 7th really exposed all of that. And in fact, you had a much better bet of finding out the truth of what happened in Gaza and on October the 7th by reading Israeli newspapers than you would by reading the Times or the Telegraph or the Mail, etc. This period of denial lasted approximately until March, April, about 18 months, till March, April 2025, when you then got the arrival of Trump as president, and Israel broke the ceasefire. Now, Trump made it impossible for even for sort of Starmer to support sort of American policy, which had been because he started talking about ethnic cleansing and so on. and once in Gaza, and that was made it impossible. Britain had to resolve, because that wasn't formally British policy anyway. Informally, of course, it had been. We were collaborating with that policy, but under the formal position of a two-state solution and support for that. And so you've got a change in the media. You've got some genuine criticism, and that lasted for about, not very strong, and then that lasted for 6 months until we enter stage 3, which is the ceasefire, the so-called ceasefire, and the Board of Peace. Now that was taken as a sign by the British politicians and also British media that they could divert their attention from what was happening in Gaza, and also to revert to denial. So this wasn't a ceasefire. There's never been a ceasefire. More than 500, I mean, it's getting worse actually every day at the moment. More than 500 Palestinians have been killed. We're going back to the sort of random slaughter of Palestinians, starvation, etc. And that hasn't been called out at all. The press use extraordinary language to avoid talking about the ceasefire. They say, you know, that time Israel killed about 100 in 24 hours. The ceasefire was tested. You just have to think about, had Hamas done anything similar, you know, that wouldn't have been tested. They'd broken it, and that would be. That we're now back into the formal pro-Netanyahu reporting, which was the feature of the first 18 months. And I now want to go back to this analysis, attempt to analyze the comparisons, very meaningful comparisons between the Epstein-Mandelson story and indeed the Gaza, and why the one can't really be understood without the other. So but Mandelson has created the modern, not just the modern Labour Party. He didn't just hypnotize 3 Labour prime ministers. That would have been Blair, Brown, and then Starmer. He also hypnotized the Tory party, which accepted his methodology. His methodology was, and it's very important to understand what that methodology was. It was a worship of money and success. It was an abandonment of all values. It was a renunciation of the social democratic British state as formed really by Clement Attlee's government in 1945 to 50, and it was an abandonment of due process, a turning back on Labour Party members and asking rich men, almost always men, to take over the funding and running and policy making. I'm just about to knock over this, and policy making of the Labour Party. A renunciation actually of domestic British law. That was a 2-tier justice system emerges during the long Epstein-Mandelson period of politics. There's a one system for the rich and another system for everybody else. Now look at the parallel which we have seen in Gaza. It's exactly the same thing. You have a, how should we say, in order to support Israel's destruction of Gaza and the slaughter of tens and tens of thousands of innocent people, we have had to turn our back again on the post-45 settlement. Remember, the post-45 settlement was the United Nations, the International Court of Justice, more lately the International Criminal Court. And this was an architecture set up and created by Roosevelt and Churchill during World War I. Actually, they met in 1941, they discussed this architecture, and it was invented precisely to avoid the calamities of the 1930s. And we have deliberately torn that to shreds in order to support Netanyahu. Similarly, the Mandelson-Epstein system was tearing up the social democratic system which Britain created after 1945, and it is a tearing up international and domestic law, international norms and domestic norms simultaneously, and you see the same people doing it. If you look at the Board of Peace, the so-called Board of Peace, almost all of them have strong or Epstein connections. If you look at domestically at it, the British politicians of all the parties have accepted that Mandelson settlement, which means that you are handing political power to rich men. The one person who hasn't, Mandelson said that his job was to destroy him. Every day he got out of bed to destroy him, has just joined us in this room. And it's impossible not to draw the attention to the fact that one of the very few British politicians who have actually stood up against have constantly campaigned against Britain's complicity, and as Matt's pointed out, more than complicity. He's quite right to tell me off in a very nice way. It has been Jeremy Corbyn. There is decency in British politics. We're very lucky, and I think we have from this moment collectively to try and fight for a return of that decency spreads much, much further. But like you were making a very wonderful point, which was that the policy in Gaza is not supported by the majority and never has been of the British people. Nor have the British people ever given their assent to the Mandelson-Epstein form of politics, which has just been exposed. And so we have been governed in the interest, very visibly and very easy to prove, both in the foreign policy and in domestic policy, of an oligarchic elite which is completely contemptuous of the interests of ordinary people. And I think this is what I hope we can move towards.
Thank you very much, Peter, for that brilliant talk, and also for all your work exposing the media complicity. I mean, I'll just add before I introduce the next speaker that something even more sinister than the media complicity in this country since the genocide began is the attacks on independent journalists who are actually exposing Israeli crimes, which is unprecedented. One really sinister example is a friend of mine called Asa Winstanley, who's a very good reporter for Electronic Intifada, who's done basically more than any other journalist exposing the Israel lobby in this country and its attack on British democracy, essentially. In October 2024, so not that long after the Labour government came in, his house was raided in a pre-dawn raid by 6 police officers, counter-terrorism police. All his journalistic devices were seized, his computers, his phones, and he wasn't even charged or arrested, which I didn't even know could happen in the UK. Apparently, the police can come in and take all your devices and raid your house early in the morning and not even charge you with a crime. In May 2025, it was ruled unlawful what they did. Interestingly, that whole case, not a word about it has ever been written about in a UK newspaper, which is insane to me. But it really does show that the public sphere is not protected in this country by the media, and it's not protected by NGOs either, who dropped the ball on the Asa Winstanley case. Just yesterday, to add to that, to go to what Peter's saying about the Mandelson style of politics, which has infected the whole of the British establishment, really, it was revealed that Labour Together, which is run by Morgan McSweeney, Keir Starmer's right-hand man and Mandelson's protege, paid £30,000 to a PR firm to dig dirt on independent journalists, including John McAvoy at Declassified. Again, unprecedented and deeply sinister. But it goes to show the power of independent media, that the power in this country is protected by the mainstream media. And when journalists do their job, it really can affect change. So it's important that everyone supports independent media like Peter does. Okay, next up, we've got Jeremy Corbyn, who will speak about the political complicity of the British political class in the destruction of Gaza.
First of all, thank you very, very much for inviting me. Apologies, a bit late. I was outside of London and I just got back on a train just now. And this is the third time in a very short period I've been in Tower Hamlets for a wonderful meeting with your mayor to discuss the brilliant expansion of youth centres and youth services, and also a conference on Sudan, and your brilliant anti-racist work in stopping the fascists marching through Whitechapel. And that we've got to do over again and again and again. I'm going to read something to you. If you've already heard it, please be patient. If you haven't, please be prepared to be shocked. I got a statement this morning from my good friend, Dr. Mustafa Barghouti, who's an independent member of the Palestine National Initiative, member of the Palestine National Assembly. And he's forwarded to me a statement by the director of Al-Shifa Medical Complex, Gaza. And I'm going to read it to you. The director of Al-Shifa Medical Complex stated that approximately 10,000 individuals remain missing underneath the rubble across the Gaza Strip. Of these, around 5,000 persons are unaccounted for, and their fate remains unknown. He further reported that 66 boxes were received yesterday from the occupying authorities, that's the IDF, containing only the skulls of deceased victims. In addition, the bodies of women were handed over with no information provided regarding the location or circumstances of their abduction. According to the director, some of the returned bodies showed signs of severe mutilation, including severed hands, while others had their abdomens surgically opened and subsequently restitched. Thus, these findings raise grave concerns. He warned of credible indications of organ theft from the bodies of martyrs in the Gaza Strip, describing these acts as serious violations of international humanitarian law and human dignity. And that I just received this morning. Just think about that statement. And I have no reason to disbelieve anything Mustafa Barghouti says or the director of Al-Shifa Medical Complex. That is, all that has gone on since October of 2023. And during that time, many of us, everyone in this room, I'm sure, has met, has marched, has demonstrated, has spoken out, has emailed, has demanded, and sort of felt like they're banging their head against a brick wall as the British government obdurately, time after time after time after time, said, we're not sure that the question of international law has been breached. We're not sure that there's really a genocide going on. We're quite confident that our weapons are not being used for anti-humanitarian purposes. And we've had this stuff going on now for, what is it now, 2 years? 2 years of all this going on. And in the meantime, we can all see the film on Al Jazeera and other channels. I mean, I move between channels, so nobody accuses me of just watch. I look at Al Jazeera, France 24, BBC, Turkish television, and so on. The footage is there of homes, villages, people's lives and hopes utterly destroyed. And then we have this Board of Peace, which Peter was just speaking about. I want to first of all say a huge thank you to Peter Oborne for his book, for his work, for his bravery, and for the abuse that he's suffered for speaking out for human rights, human dignity, and human justice. And so when somebody does speak out and they get the kind of abuse heaped upon them and the threats made against them and so on, professional threats as well as all the rest, that's the time not to stand back. It's the time to step forward and give them our support. Peter, you have our support. And so the IDF has finally accepted that 71,000 deaths have occurred in Gaza. I'm pretty sure they only accepted that figure because they know it's actually much higher than 71,000. And they thought, well, we'll just say settle on 71,000 and we'll get away with it. 71,000 people is the equivalent of a very full football stadium in Britain of people who've lost their lives at the hands of IDF bombardment. And the issue has, as you know, been taken to international court and elsewhere. And I just want to quickly say a couple of things about that. I had the privilege and the honor of going to the International Court of Justice with the South Africans to watch and observe their application under the Genocide Convention. And to me, it was a deeply moving experience because the International Court of Justice is a wonderful building. It's built in the 1920s, and there's hope that there would be an international legal order that would save the world from the carnage that it just emerged from in the First World War, and that nations would accept an international authority as a way of solving disputes between nations. And it's a wonderful building. And it was then, after the League of Nations collapsed, it was then occupied correctly by the International Court of Justice, which is a continuation of what went before. And I heard the application being made. I watched the judges in operation, and you all know what the decision was, or the recommendation was, that came out of that. But I was also thinking that South Africa, a country that was a colony, was occupied, was a subject of internal wars, and was a subject for the most disgusting, depraved, brutal apartheid system. And you know what? The South African delegation said, everything we've described today that's happening to the Palestinian people in Gaza is worse than most of the worst things that happened during the apartheid regime in South Africa. And they said, we're doing this because Madiba said we should do it, but we're doing it because we believe in international justice. And what's the reward for South Africa? Recommendations from many allegedly friendly governments like Britain: don't pursue the case, you shouldn't be taking it there, it's not appropriate, it's offensive to the rest of the world. What's the recommendation to South Africa by the United States? Put extra tariffs on them to further damage their economy because they've had the bravery to stand up for the Palestinian people against the genocide that's been inflicted upon them. So let's show some support and thanks to South Africa for what it's done. And Peter quite rightly talked about the way in which the British political system has been affected by this. After all of this had gone on and I'd been re-elected to Parliament in July 24, our Independent Alliance group of MPs have pursued this doggedly week in, week out, and we divvy up questions between ourselves, and we're there every single statement on Gaza, on the Middle East, raising broadly the same points. And I've raised the question of British complicity in it. So I introduced a private members bill to Parliament, private members bill which would have required the government to establish an independent public inquiry into all the circumstances surrounding British participation in the Israeli onslaught on Gaza, and indeed, for that matter, the occupation of the West Bank, but specifically on Gaza, the Gaza Tribunal Bill. It got through its first stage, more or less, without any much opposition, partly because they felt they could deal with it at the next stage, which was to kill it off altogether, which is exactly what they did. Just denied it any debating time and any further discussion in Parliament. So I said, okay, in return then, we will set up our own independent tribunal of inquiry. So we set up the Gaza Tribunal of Inquiry, which met over 2 days last November in Church House in Westminster. And we had 29 witness statements presented to us, and they were concerning a whole range of issues. Concerning the supply of arms, Katie Fallon from Campaign Against the Arms Trade documented that 633 million single individual export licenses for the 10-year period from 2015 to 2024, including aircraft, technology, grenades, bombs, missiles, military training equipment. In addition to these single licenses, they gathered evidence of another 71 unlimited value open licenses, which allowed an unlimited quantity of weapons and parts. And that under the Conservative government, this totaled £48.9 million, comprising £45 million related to the F-35 programme and £3.9 million related to the single licenses. Additionally, there are 4 open value licenses. Under the Labour government, to date, the estimated value is £148 million, £148 million for further exports and further licenses, and 162 million for the F-35 program. And between October and December 2024 alone, this was only 3 months after the Labour government had been elected, more arms export licenses were granted than were approved by the previous government for the whole of the period from 2020 to 2023. Starmer's government has actually sent more weapons to Israel, more military support, and more military cooperation than even the Conservatives did under David Cameron. At the same time, saying that it wasn't necessary to invoke international law. The F-35 jets are absolutely crucial to Israel's role. They have bombed, they have destroyed, they have been surveillance, and all the rest of it. 15% of all the components of F-35 jets are made in Britain. And we pursued this week in, week out. Hamish Faulkner, the minister, kept telling me, and David Lammy, when he was Foreign Secretary, the same thing, that it was impossible to distinguish between parts that went into the F-35 global program from those that were sold onto Israel. In other words, you sort of make a part for an F-35, put it in the chain, and you don't know where it ends up. Really? Really? Are we expected to believe this nonsense? There is the most precise and accurate following of every single component of those planes. They know full well where they go. They knew full well they were helping Israel to destroy homes, hospitals, and schools in Gaza. They knew that all along. Likewise, they knew full well that the use of the Royal Air Force Base at Akrotiri was having the same effect. The transfer of weapons, the surveillance flights that went on. Remember when Keir Starmer went to RAF Akrotiri and said, there's lots of things going on here, I can't tell you what they are. Why not? What's the secret? And they refused to say all along. And so that is another part of it. And then our inquiry also took evidence from a number of other people, including Nick Maynard and Victoria Rose, wonderful, brilliant, superb doctors who were holding back tears just to give us the evidence of what they'd seen and had to do in Gaza. And then we heard from Mark Smith, British Foreign Office official who resigned in protest over continued arms sales to Israel. He was the lead official on the UK arms export licensing report, which assessed whether the UK was legally compliant. His own assessment, it was impossible to see how the UK was acting legally. Senior career Foreign Office official, nothing in it for him personally, huge risk for him personally for saying that. He was not prepared to carry on working for the Foreign Office when they were carrying out acts that he believed to be not legally compliant. And he bravely came and gave evidence to our tribunal. So we're producing a full statement and report. And I have to say, I want to say thank you to all those that contributed to it. And I hope you'll all have a careful look at it when it comes out. And we're presenting it to the Hague group, which is the group assembled by the Progressive International of nations that support the ICJ decision and the ICC decision at a conference to be held in Amsterdam in the beginning of March. The Peace and Justice Project is not well funded. It's a very valuable organization. We put this tribunal on because we believe it was a contribution we could make to begin to inform people. What I witnessed all through all of this was the complicity of our media in attacking all of us that spoke up for the Palestinian people, the most disgusting abuse thrown at us individually, the most disgusting abuse thrown at those that organized the Palestine marches and demonstrations and is still thrown at them. And then you saw, as Peter explained, this horrible connotation and connection between the arms lobby, which has made a vast amount of money out of sales in this. The American arms lobby has made even more. And the refusal of the British government to have one scintilla of difference between its foreign policy and the USA until absolutely forced into it right at the end of it, when they did suspend some licenses, but I'm not quite sure how much effect all of those have had. And so it's how we recognize what's rotten with our political system and the wider politics that go with it. This week, Peter Mandelson has been, how should I put it, more than exposed for his activity. And the relationship he had with Epstein and the relationship he had with others. And the Prime Minister arrived in Parliament on Wednesday to say with great gusto, if I knew now what I didn't know then I wouldn't have done what I did then because of what I know now. Wow. That was like a sort of kid in school who says, who's been caught, you know, copying their homework from somebody else. If I'd known I was going to be caught copying the homework, I'd have copied it from somebody else, not them, in order to avoid any punishment. Utterly ridiculous and pathetic. He knew full well of Mandelson's involvement with Epstein from the very beginning. He knew full well that this golden circle created by Mandelson ever since 1987, when he appeared on the political scene in Westminster, when Neil Kinnock brought him in as a director of information for the Labour Party. And my great friend Tony Benn said to me the day he met Mandelson, said, you know, old comrade, I don't like that man. And sucking his pipe says, and you know what, old comrade? He always called me old comrade. I don't trust him either. I don't think he'll do any of us any good. Where was Tony wrong? And so we've had these years, not just of promoting mates and the golden circle that goes with it, but it's fundamentally undermining of our politics. Undermining of our politics, that it assumes that everybody that becomes an elected politician is in it for money, in it for themselves, in it for their own aggrandizement. And there's a whole media that's complicit with all of this. When I challenged the role of Epstein during the general election campaign when I was the leader of the party, I was condemned because of the way I pronounced his name. They were more concerned about the way I pronounced his name than what I was accusing him of doing and what I was saying about what Palantir and other groups were trying to do to our National Health Service. And so it's not just doing down political enemies. It's not just promoting this person, that person, or the other one. There is a very dangerous commercial connection in all of this, in that companies that are involved with Elbit Systems, that are involved in Israel, that are making manufacturing here, are now being given carte blanche access to all of our National Health Service records. This is a corruption of our public services and our public life, because Mandelson and Blair particularly do not believe in public enterprise, do not believe in public service. They think public government is essentially a company. So you do a deal, whatever. It doesn't really matter. I think it does matter. I think public ownership is important. I think a publicly run health service is important, and a publicly accountable health service. I want to trust our health service. I don't want to think that my health records, your health records, your health records, your health records are actually ending up in a company that is involved with the military around the world, that is keeping records on the existence of every single Palestinian in Gaza. Think about this. The IDF know the identity of every single person in Gaza, but they're not able to ensure that every single person in Gaza gets food, water, medicine, housing, health, or education. It's only for military purposes they hold that information. That's the kind of surveillance system that we're allowing to invade our public services. So in the debate on Mandelson this week, the official opposition, the Conservative opposition, put forward actually a very good motion. It was very well crafted, very well prepared, which set out all the information that they felt should be provided to an inquiry. The government then put up an amendment saying, except that information which might affect international relations or national security. Well, that can cover pretty much anything. Almost anything you could say, well, there could be a security implication with that. There could be international relations implication from that, even if there obviously wasn't one. And so after a lot of shouting and so on, they then changed their amendment to say it would all go to the Security and Intelligence Committee and all the information would be provided. I am not really very happy about that. I think there should be a public inquiry into the whole thing, because I don't think Parliament, because of the way in which patronage operates in Parliament, the way patronage operates in the Cabinet Office, operates in the civil service, operates throughout government, is really competent or capable of having an inquiry into it. So I will continue to pursue my demands for a public inquiry. It took us years to get the Chilcot inquiry, but the Chilcot inquiry was a very important step forward in exposing what had gone on in Iraq. And so I conclude by just simply saying this. Thank you to everybody for not being bamboozled, those who haven't been, by the media conspiracy and complicity in all of this. Thank you to all of those that haven't been bamboozled into saying that going on a march to end genocide is taking part in a march of hate, when it's actually a march of love of humanity. I hate the killing of anybody, whoever they are, be they Jewish, Muslim, Hindu, or anything else. I want to live in a world of peace. That means you have to recognize, you have to deal with the injustices that are existing now. And the Palestinian people have been the most grotesquely, unjustly treated people almost anywhere in the world. And so it is brave journalists like Peter that have written and spoken out and had career threats because they've done that, that it's so important to support them in what they're doing. Because the truth makes us stronger. The truth ultimately sets us free and frees us from this horrible nexus and this nasty network of webs that have done so much to damage our lives, our public services, and make this country, our country, complicit, because it is complicit, by supplying arms. When you know genocide is being committed, you are therefore complicit in the continuation of that genocide. I'm disgusted by that. We're all going to carry on campaigning until it has ended. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jeremy, for that brilliant talk. I'd also like to thank Jeremy for just being a beacon of humanity in the viper's nest of Parliament. We've seen the ugly people and groups that run our political system, like Mandelson and Morgan McSweeney and Keir Starmer. And I always see Jeremy as the opposite, the antithesis of that. And it's been extremely powerful, especially since 2015, to see someone who is actually decent and human within this system, which is so inhuman, actually speaking and giving a voice to people who don't have a voice. And also, you know, there's no more dehumanized people in the world than Palestinians. And Jeremy has never accepted that, which is also very powerful and rare, unfortunately, in the political class. And this goes back way before the genocide. I remember when I was becoming politicized during the Second Intifada period when I was much younger, and I'd go to Palestine meetings, and Jeremy would be there in his keffiyeh and his flat cap. And that was, again, it was unpopular because there's so many incentives not to speak up for the Palestinians, but Jeremy has always done that. So thank you, Jeremy. Our final speaker is Anas Al-Takriti, who will examine the complicity of the Arab states. And I'm looking forward to this one because this has been a major revelation of the genocide, the role that the Arab states have played.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Friends, assalamu alaikum. Peace be with you all, and thank you very much for making this evening. It's a full house, as you can all see, and we have a brilliant panel. Thank you very much, Matt, for running the panel. And Peter, my congratulations to you. And it's brilliant always to have someone like Jeremy, whom I absolutely agree is someone whom, in the midst of the filth that we've been exposed to over the course of the past 3 days, truly provides an incredible beacon of hope that there is still an element of decency sitting in Westminster. So, I mean, Jeremy is doing far greater than merely speaking up for the oppressed around the world, including the Palestinians. He's actually providing hope for those who read whatever's being exposed and unredacted and feel, as I did, I'm not sure about you, but I'm pretty sure that many of us felt physically sick by what we read. And, you know, something quite important to note, that all those mentioned, caught up in that cabal of repugnant evil, are all pro-Israeli Zionists. Every single one of them. Not a single one of them ever spoke a good word about Palestine or Palestinians. In fact, someone who was mentioned in the files, and probably arguably the only person to come out even better than before, was Norman Finkelstein, whom, when mentioned, when an email offered him to come and meet this person, he immediately responded by saying, if I ever come across Jeffrey Epstein or Alan Dershowitz, that lawyer of I don't know what law, I will strangulate them. It's just, it tells you where Palestine stands in the midst of good versus evil. And I was someone whom until recently would use the word evil very, very sparingly. And I wouldn't really use that word because of everything that brings up, but to be perfectly honest, I mean, over the course of the past few days, I don't know, but it's, you know, evil is personified in the kind of people that, unfortunately, they don't just sit in a dark corner, they run the affairs of the world. So back to Peter and his book. First of all, thank you very much, Peter. And I'm fortunate enough to have known Peter now for over 20 years. In fact, our first encounter, and Peter was renowned, and I believe still this is described as a conservative journalist. Back then, he was a hardened conservative, I have to say. But in 2006, 2007, he produced for the BBC a show about the kind of treatment that Muslims were coming in for in the midst of the war on terror. And it was a brilliant expose by someone whom, to be perfectly honest, no one expected to speak in those terms. And I'm pleased to have, at the time, been part of a panel where we were holding a huge event, part of the history of London, Islam Expo. You'll remember, Peter, and we were a panel deciding on whom we were going to award a of the Muslim community, and it was Peter Oborne. This was back in 2006. So way before Peter became the Peter that we all know and love, I'm pleased to have encountered Peter, and also on a personal note, in 2014, 12 years ago, Peter came across the story that someone called Anas El-Tikriti had his bank accounts closed by HSBC. And he contacted me in sort of semi-disbelief, saying, can you show me the letters that the bank sent you? And we met up, and he did a fantastic show on Radio 4, exposing the unknown working in the shadows, insisting on no one speaking of its identity, database business called WorldCheck, the very first to speak about WorldCheck and this murky business of profiling, where entities, companies, states would pay hundreds of thousands every year to subscribe to, and where countless lives, companies, ventures, projects, charities have been ruined as a result of. Peter Oborne, I would claim, was the very first to publicly expose that particular practice and to actually tell people, by the way, do you know that this works literally in the dark, in the corner? It literally, on its profiles, it has a big disclaimer saying no one is to reveal the identity of WorldCheck. But it was Peter Oborne who brought this to millions of people back then and exposed this particular business. Now, I think that, you know, the book, the author, the panel, we're here to talk about Palestine. And whilst I will come to the very simple, to be honest, the very simple and grotesque mapping of the situation of Arab states vis-a-vis Palestine, and particularly the genocide, but I think there are a few things that we need to mention. The first being that we're amid a brilliant campaign being run called the Red Ribbon Campaign, which highlights the fact that Israel, until this very day, holds 9,100 hostages, and they are Palestinian hostages. Many of whom, by the way, many of whom are kids. We're talking about 12-year-olds, 13-year-olds. Hundreds of women with their babies held today. A big thing was made about the remains of an Israeli hostage that Israel was waiting on, and which, by the way, even Haaretz mentioned the fact that Israel knew all along where the remains were, and they were on the Israeli side, by the way. But they decided to just play that game and keep bombing Gaza under the pretext of, well, we still haven't received the remains of our final hostage. Yet 9,100 Palestinian hostages are held by the IDF, tortured, physically, psychologically tormented. Medication is being withheld, and abuse to a level that, by the way, now we understand, now that we've read all about what's going on in the Epstein files, it doesn't really come as a total shock like it did when a few months ago we saw the demonstrations of thousands of Israelis outside a government building defending and supporting those who raped Palestinian hostages. At the time, I was in disbelief. I thought to myself, is this true? Maybe this is made up. Maybe the reporter has the story upside down. But now that I've read what goes on, what went on, what still goes on, I'm not that surprised anymore. It seems that that is fair play. That is par for the course. for those who stand with the occupier, those who stand against the oppressed, those who do whatever it takes to lie, to cheat, to deceive, to rape, to kill, to maim, to amputate, simply because they can, simply because it serves whatever set of interests that they regard as theirs. Many years ago, we heard about how a hefty part of American military and financial aid to Israel was going towards constructing this thing called the Iron Dome. This was going to keep Israel safe, we were told. Hundreds of billions sent from America as well as its allies, including our own government and many European partners, were sent in order to construct this Iron Dome. However, we saw that that Iron Dome isn't really there. One wonders where the billions of dollars went. But it's not really there, but I can stand here and with incredible embarrassment tell you that the real Iron Dome are the Arab states and Arab regimes surrounding Israel. Those are the real Iron Dome that protects Israel. You have to understand that the lies of Israel over decades, lies that have become part of, if you wish, folklore, things that are written now in books and people write about them. And I used to lecture at postgraduate level, and I've read countless dissertations and theses where flippantly someone mentions the fact that Israel is at war with 22 Arab states, or that Israel is the only democracy in the Middle East. These would just slip off the tongue so effortlessly. Yet they are amongst the most grotesque lies that Israel has benefited from. By the way, the fact that Israel, that claim, that absolutely false, absurd, repugnant claim that Israel is the only democracy in the Middle East, by the way, that's a pledge, that's a promise, that's an oath by Israel that it would ensure that no one, not a single people in the region, would ever attain democracy. Ever. That's a promise. It's not a claim. And Israel has forever and a day worked tirelessly to uproot any sign of people yearning for their freedom, to break away from their oppressive regimes. I remind you of what happened in Tunisia, then in Egypt in 2011. When the people of Egypt just basically held fort in the Tahrir Square and brought down a brutal regime. The very first thing that happened, and people forget this, by the way, as soon as Hosni Mubarak stood aside and the people felt that they had gotten their freedom, what happened the very next day? The news was that a crowd had gathered in front of the Israeli embassy in Cairo, and the embassy being on the 6th floor of that building, a young Egyptian scaled with his hands, scaled the building, brought down the Israeli flag, and hung up the Palestinian flag. This was Egypt. And it was less than 24 hours after the fall of the Hosni Mubarak regime. Israel knows full well, if the Arab people get a whiff of freedom, the first thing they will do is act to bring down Israel. And that's what it means by Israel is the only democracy in the Middle East, because no other surrounding people is allowed to attain freedom or democracy. The stance of the regimes is disgraceful. It's shameful. But it has been for decades. The very formation of these 22, this carved up region of people who share a language, share a culture, largely share a set of faiths, Islam being the dominant, but also amongst them Christians and Jews. That region that was carved up by colonial masters, Britain and France at the time, making them these desperate, these weakling countries whose main purpose of existence is to maintain the regimes that sit high and mighty. And in order to continue to sit high and mighty, must oppress, must torment, must strike fear. When we were told that it was peace that Israel wanted, peace that the Arabs didn't want, but it was Israel's pursuit, peace. And we have this thing called the Abrahamic Accords. And why is it not that other countries join this trail of peace? And now we find out that the Abrahamic Accord aren't meant to establish peace. They are meant to allow Israel to slaughter Palestinians at will. They are meant so that Israel can drive out Palestinians with total impunity. That is the purpose of the Abrahamic Accord. Let no one ever convince us that the pursuit of Israel is peace. What we saw in Gaza happen over the course of the past 2 years, 4 months, is evidence that Israel is incapable of considering peace as an option. It's incapable of considering any element of the Arab people that surround it free to think, free to express, free to act as they want to, as they wish for. So let's not spend too much time talking about Arab regimes, the struggle of freedom for the Arab people, and I exclude no one. I exclude no one. You can look at the 22, 23, I'm not sure what the latest count is, of Arab states. Every single one of those people yearns for freedom. In every one of those countries, there are prison cells full of political dissidents who dared one day, at one moment, to express their views. In fact, hundreds, at least, as far as we know, hundreds, linger in prisons today because they raised the Palestinian flag during the genocide. Hundreds are tortured in dungeons in various Arab cities and towns today because they dared mention the name Hind Rajab, because they mentioned the word genocide, because they liked a tweet by Jeremy or by Matt or by Peter. Hundreds today linger in prison and their freedom confiscated and their families ruined because they dared show sympathy or support with their brethren who speak the same language, share the same culture, share the same faith, and are being obliterated by Israel. So that's the situation. But hey, these are our allies. These are our friends. We have trade deals with these countries. We have contracts that ensure that hundreds of thousands of people are employed. We would like to go and spend our Christmases in sunny this or sunny that. And therefore, we can't really press on with the human rights file. We can't really, seriously dig at that particular scab. It's something that we don't bring up because we have these trade deals, you see, because we have these agreements. So once again, and even on the level of political relations, the Palestinians are the main victims. even when it comes with Britain's relationships with any one of those states, the sure victim is the Palestinian cause and the Palestinian people. I need to come to an end, but you know, whether we talk about Egypt and the Rafah crossing, I mean, how disgusting, seriously. When, I mean, I've been to Rafah, Jeremy, you've been to Rafah, Peter, you've been to Rafah, Matt. Lala, have you been?
Yes.
I mean, it's a crossing, you can walk it. You can walk it. But all of a sudden, for now, not only 2 years, 4 months of the genocide, but for the past 20 years since the siege on Gaza, that path that you can walk in 25 minutes has become impossible. Impossible. You can't take in a bottle of water. You can't take in a piece of bread. Absolutely impossible. And of course, Israel is the occupier. Of course, Israel is to blame. But what of our Egyptian brothers? What of Arab? You know, there's one thing that is constantly appearing in Arab culture, you know, novels and whatever, about the traits of being an Arab. It's honor. Where is that honor? Where is that honor? The fact that if a guest whom you may not even know or recognize comes to you, you give them all that you have, even if your own children end up being hungry. That kind of generosity. So where is it when it comes to the Palestinians? Where is it? My friends, tonight is a fantastic night. And indeed, the fact that we're gathered here to celebrate Peter's new book is really a magnificent occasion. And it's important that whilst we buy the book, we discuss the contents of the book, that we also understand what complicity means, you know, that scope, who it includes, those who watched by and did nothing, as well as those who clapped, those who applauded, those who gave platforms, media and otherwise. And it's also an event where certain people need to be recognized. And today, I don't know why, but, you know, seeing Peter, who is now one of our country's most prominent journalists, I can't omit from my mind a great journalist who passed away in December of 2023, John Pilger. John Pilger, who brought to the world the title, Palestine is still the question. Indeed, Palestine is still the question. Thank you very much.
Thank you for that brilliant speech, Anas. And also to say thank you to Anas, who has been integral to the anti-war movement and the pro-Palestine movement for the past 25 years, and making sure that the Muslim community is politically engaged. He's worked behind the scenes tirelessly to be an architect of the anti-war movement. So thank you, Anas. I remember, actually, we first met, you won't remember this, but when I was at Leeds University, in 2003, when he was leading the opposition to during the build up to Iraq. So thank you. Now we haven't got much time left, but we have got a bit of time for questions from the audience. So I think there's a roving mic. So is that going to stretch? You got that one. Right. Do you want to shuffle that back?
Great. Hello, my name is Matthew Carr. I've just got a question for Mr. Corbyn. Thanks very much for the great speeches, very inspirational. I'm an independent journalist, and I'm very worried that the current situation leaves us in this malaise where we have not only Labour, the Tories and Reform up against a good coalition of alternative government. Jeremy, the press also are against you and the good coalition. Are you doing enough to try and embrace the other left parties, even the Lib Dems, Aspire, all of those other parties, so that you get back in, we get back, the people gets back into office in the May elections coming up and the general elections after that?
Thanks. Thanks very much for your question. Perfectly fair question. Do enough. I hope I do enough. I spent most of my life traveling around the country, addressing meetings, rallies, and meeting left-wing groups in your party and independent groups all over the country. And I am determined that we will build a sense of unity of the left in this country. And my message to everyone is that we don't have time for the luxury of endless internal debate. We don't have time for that. It's a luxury we cannot afford. We've got to be out there campaigning on the international justice issues, which you've heard of tonight, and of course on the issues of poverty and redistribution of wealth and power within our society. And so I am very hopeful that independent groups around the country will do very well in the elections in May. Here in Tower Hamlets, there's Aspire. Across the road, just down the road in Newham, you've got Newham Independents, you've got Redbridge groups, you've got Hackney groups, and so on. Fundamentally, these independent groups around the country are not saying anything that is that different. And you will also notice that if you look for differences between people, you can always find them. But you will also notice that the independents and left groups have all not contested the Denton by-election because they want to make sure that a anti-war, anti-austerity candidate wins, and so they've withdrawn in favour of ensuring that the Greens get a run at that to make sure they win it. That's sensible politics. Now, there's plenty of times and plenty of places I disagree with people. We all do that. You've got to recognise the need to build that kind of movement. So I helped to found your party. It's not been easy. Everybody knows that. I know that probably better than anybody else. But the elections are going on in the party. The new CEC will take over at the end of February. The branches will be established and they'll be tasked with the job of mobilizing, enthusing and campaigning and being open to local people, local campaigns and local organizations in order to build that serious socialist left voice in the country, which we absolutely need. And I'm determined that we will do it. Okay, thank you.
We talked about complicity this evening, but what do the panel think accountability when it comes to Gaza looks like?
I look at this very carefully at the back end of the book, and there's no question. If the ICJ, when it's taking its time, deems this is a genocide, and I'm sure there are lots of pressures on it, and I think we need to be aware of those. But it's very hard to see how they can avoid that conclusion now. Then under British law, aiding and abetting a genocide is a very serious offence. Conspiracy, I mean, there are quite a lot of genocide experts, and Matt was hinting at, well, not hinting, stating this, you know, it may be more than is participating in a genocide. These are very serious crimes under British law. Yeah. I don't think there's any. I mean, Julius Streicher was executed after Nuremberg, but even though I'd like to,
Who are you lining up? Who are you lining up against the wall?
You're leaving something up in the air there.
but what I don't think are my beloved colleagues in the media again. They are, unfortunately, in many ways, they aren't going to be held accountable. But I think they will be open to very, very sharp and wounding. And I mean, they need to be held to account, and that's possible to do.
Hi, my question is, you talked about the F-35 parts and the complicity of the West to provide them. Those are like weapons to fight specific wars, but isn't the long-term underlying value of Israel the fact that it holds nuclear weapons? And I think the Times newspaper was instrumental in leaking that information, and the scientist Mordecai, who was still under house arrest for that story. It's a bit past most people's, like, even before my time. I think it happened like in the 80s where I was born. Isn't that like a major, question that people need to ask? Why does this country have nuclear weapons which are not analyzed, which are not scrutinized?
I think it's true. Israel does hold nuclear weapons, and why do we know that? Because of the bravery of Mordecai Vanunu all those years ago, when he exposed the truth about the Dimona reactor and the weapons-grade uranium that was there, and the missile and warheads that were being prepared. Mordecai Vanunu then suffered 13 years, I think, in solitary confinement. I got to know Mordecai when he came out. I was part of the campaign for his release, and I met him the day that he came out. And to the credit of the Anglican bishop in Jerusalem, he gave him somewhere to live straight away. And I spent a lot of time in Mordecai's company. And the story was that Mordecai had become deranged by all those years of solitary confinement, and that he wasn't capable of doing anything. When he came out, he stood in front of the gates of Ashkelon prison and made a speech about how he hated being part of the oppression of the Palestinian people. That's what he said. And of course, that somehow or other didn't make it onto the 6 o'clock news in Tel Aviv that day. And he is now still in Israel, and he's not allowed a passport and not allowed to travel. He's still there. And so he was a brave man. You're quite right about the holding of nuclear weapons. And there were proposals being put at the Non-Proliferation Treaty to have a Middle East weapons of mass destruction free zone, which would have involved Iran, Israel, and indeed any other state that's capable of making nuclear weapons, which would include Saudi Arabia, who are capable of making it. They haven't got any, but if they wanted to, they probably could. That made quite a lot of progress, and then eventually collapsed on the new nuclear arms race. And so I'm hoping to be in New York for the Non-Proliferation Treaty review at the end of April and support the Global Ban Treaty on nuclear weapons, which has now been signed by a majority of the UN member states, not, of course, by any of the declared or undeclared nuclear weapon states, which include Israel. To me, nuclear weapons are an obscenity and an abomination. And I can't imagine anyone with any degree of sanity about them would ever set off a nuclear weapon knowing it would take the lives of millions of people and create a nuclear winter which would bring starvation across the whole planet. And so Israel's ownership of nuclear weapons is a factor, but even the most determined people in the IDF must recognize that if you send a nuclear weapon to bomb Beirut, it'll destroy Israel as well. You know, you cannot. Likewise, if India bombed Lahore and Lahore bombed New Delhi, you wouldn't know which weapon had killed you. It would be. It's that. This is why. I mean, I'm personally very strongly against nuclear weapons, and I did inform the BBC that I was not prepared to use them And the media said that I was a threat to national security because I wouldn't use them. And then the following day they said I was a threat to national security because I would have access to them and therefore could use them. Well, I don't know which it's going to be, but it can't be both.
Hello. Given what Matt said earlier, and also his work and the work of Declassified on the role of the British state in the genocide, particularly the use of surveillance flights, which provide over 50% of intelligence data for Israel, and also the use of RAF Akrotiri for transferring weapons, are we focusing, is the Palestine movement in the UK focusing strategically on the right things? We've mostly been focusing on the sale of arms and also pensions, but should we really be focusing on exposing that? And do you have any advice or tips on how to go about that?
Shall I answer that? Yeah. To answer your question with the word "not," I don't think we're focusing on the right things. I made this point a lot during the genocide, but partly that's because the media didn't do its job. So all the weighting of what was focused on was basically conditioned by what was being put out in the media, in the mainstream media. So as I mentioned earlier, when the mainstream media covered UK complicity, it always focused on arms. And then there were, which obviously is important because, as Jeremy mentioned, that's deep complicity and arguably participation as well. But because of that, there was a lot of grassroots pressure. There was a lot of pressure within Parliament, and then that enacted change within Parliament. On the RAF Akrotiri intelligence side, there was basically zero until we found a actual image of the spy flight over Gaza, which we got because they made the RAF, well, it was a spy plane contracted to an American company, but it was contracted to the RAF. They made a mistake. And then when we published that, that's when the mainstream media got interested for the first time, which is crazy in itself, that it took 18 months for the mainstream media to even publish an article about this participation in genocide. And then there was some pushback in the media, follow-up articles in the Daily Mail. People were asking questions in Parliament. So it's the fault of the media, and it goes to what Peter's book's about, the complicity of the media. Because if they have dropped the ball on this, which they have, every journalist who covers foreign policy, any national security should have been all over this story, but they weren't. Because they dropped the ball, there was no pressure on the government, and the participation continued and only ended when the ceasefire was announced. So yeah, I think that going forward, because obviously this is this is something that ended very recently. Going forward in terms of the accountability issue, this should be a heavy focus because it's an open and shut case at The Hague. If you are providing intelligence to a genocidal power which is committing war crimes in real time, that is participation by the letter of the law. If you got Starmer and Lammy and Healy up at The Hague, they could easily get convicted. It wouldn't be a difficult case to prove. So we should really push that. And part of the reason why it's, as I mentioned, this distraction tactic with propaganda, they emphasize certain stories which don't tell you anything about the real story. And we really have to fight back on that. And I think that there should be a campaign to, I mean, Code Pink did launch a campaign to stop the spy flights, which was important, but there should be more widespread activism on it.
Matt, if it's okay, because of time, can we take 2-3 questions together from the back?
Sure, yeah.
Okay, so 3 people here and 1 person over there.
Yeah, thanks. Great speech, Jeremy. Given tonight, earlier on, you mentioned the oligarchs were in power, the international capitalist oligarchs. Right now, we've had Tony Blair's World Economic Forum in Davos. Nigel Farage has been speaking there. Don't you think it would be a great thing to unite the left if you spoke, now he colours to mast and mentioned what it is. It's the World Economic Forum, an unelected organisation which has permeated governments around the world without anyone's consent. Wouldn't that be a great thing to say what it is? Let's get to the top, the head of the beast, the World Economic Forum. It's an international capitalist cartel, a coup d'etat.
I will take another question as well, I think. Yeah.
I'm not sure whether the last speaker has taken the wind out of my sails, because what I wanted to ask was, has anybody on the panel got an answer to publicizing as loudly as we can the people who are members of the Trilateral Commission? The Trilateral Commission is controlling the world's economy, and everyone's silent about it. That's it.
Should we take one more, yeah? One more, yeah. Just one more.
Hi, I have more than one question, but the question I'm going to ask maybe for the panel, but probably specifically for Dr. Anas. You mentioned the complicity of the Arab state. I have a very fond memory of the Egyptian revolution you talked of. And the complicity now extends to, we know UAE work in the Horn of Africa, trying to fragment Yemen and Somaliland, all this. So how do you see the future of the Arab regimes, whether it's in Egypt, whether it's in Jordan, whether it's around Somalia, or, you know, specifically the complicit regimes like the UAE and maybe of course, to a certain degree, Saudi Arabia? Thank you.
Thanks. Okay, Anas, do you want to go first, and then I'll pass it to you guys?
I'm hopeful that since Gaza, if you recall at the very start of Gaza in our demonstrations and in our meetings, something that most people spoke about and spoke about quite loudly, and that is that Gaza will change everything in the world and it will impact the entire world. Despite the fact that you open an atlas of the world and you can barely see Gaza, but that dot in the global atlas has literally impacted the entire world, and not only geographically, but also our understanding and awareness of politics and how things work. And there are many, many things that have occurred, I believe, as an either direct or indirect impact of Gaza, including, I mean, just mentioning one, the victory of Zohran Mamdani in New York. I mean, that in itself would have been inconceivable had it been outside the context of the genocide and people becoming so aware that they are taken for fools by not only the political class, but also by the media, and then looked for something else, looked for something different. I hope that this trend continues. I'm hopeful and optimistic. I hope I'm not being naive, but I'm optimistic that this trend is beyond a go back or turning point. It's now on a path of its own. And people around the world are now paying attention, not only to what politicians are doing, but what financiers, what the rich, as well as what the media is doing to cover up the gruesome crimes, such as the ones that now are being forcefully exposed. And by the way, they are not being exposed. Let's not be fooled. The vast majority of documents are redacted. And that belies, that goes against the freedom of speech and the freedom of knowledge. If we truly believe in the use of information and the freedom of information, no redaction should ever occur unless it's to protect certain individuals and their identities. But there are redactions of figures whom need to be known. But what I mean is, referring to your question, I'm hoping that the next few years, hopefully not too long, we'll see a radical change and transformation brought about by the declaration of people around the world that enough is enough, that we're not going to be taken for fools anymore. And something will happen, whether it'll be in the same way that's happened in Cairo in 2011, or whether it'll be in a totally different way. I'm not entirely sure, but the way in which the world is being governed right now is unsustainable. It's unsustainable on every single level, whether it be economically, whether it be socially, whether it be humanitarian, on every single level. This is unsustainable. What will happen and how it will happen is anyone's guess. But I have to say, I am optimistic, and particularly in regards with the fact that regardless of the, the work, tireless 24/7 work of Arab regimes to suppress their people, yet at the very first opportunity to express anything, recently, what's the main story in the region? The conflict between Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates. What's the very first thing that Saudi Arabia did because in order to spite the United Arab Emirates? It allowed its bots and its spokespeople to raise the issue of Palestine. It allowed its imams in mosques to all of a sudden speak about Palestine. You see, wherever you go, Palestine is the issue that unites people around the world. You can differ on anything, on ideologies, on the economics, on whatever, but the one thing that brings people together is Palestine. And hence, that is why these regimes fight any kind of sign of solidarity or support or campaigning for Palestine.
Use this one. So on the question of the Arab states, I think you can look at some of the Arab states that have been intentionally and deliberately shredded. So look at Syria, look at Iraq, look at Libya. These were all states who, despite having extremely authoritarian states, were nevertheless seen as enemies of the United States and of Israel. And so what we're seeing now is that they have been basically torn asunder. There are internal divisions, there are sectarian conflicts where there used to be none. And so we see this kind of an inward turn in some of these formerly radical states in trying to address the questions of the fissures that have been forced upon them by continuous wars. Then you have the long-standing allies of the US, long-standing at least since 1979, which is Egypt and Jordan and Morocco. And with those, we see again and again and again an attempt by the public in those places to hold their regimes to account. And in every instance, actually, mobilization for Palestine ends up being one of the very first steps in trying to hold their states to account. And of course, in every time that this happens, those movements are quashed, usually by the US and by its allies. Then you come to the Gulf states. And there, I think the best analysis was done by people like Ghassan Kanafani in the 1960s, who said that in order for Arab people to be free, you can't just get rid of Israel. You have to get rid of all of the monarchies that are actually rentier states, clients of the United States. What has happened there is interesting, because with the exception of Saudi Arabia, most of these emirates, basically, around the peninsula, have engineered their population in such a way that they have a citizenry of about 10% of the population, 30 or 40 at the most in Bahrain, actually depending on the labor of a deportable, repressible, and disposable group of immigrants. So there, the struggle has to be for trying to attain citizenship for these populations in order to ensure that they can actually also dictate the politics of those states. But what we're seeing there is actually it's going in the other direction. Kuwait has just shut down its parliament. It has just started stripping the Bedouin, the Bedou citizens of their citizenship. It is actually much more repressive.
The Kuwaiti ambassador in London saw his citizenship stripped.
Yes, so indeed, yeah, exactly. The ambassadors even had his citizenship stripped. So these are all really quite significant, actually, setbacks. What I find fascinating is Saudi Arabia. Because I think that what is going to happen is going to be when the Saudi public actually end up saying they've had enough. And they are the linchpin of power in the region right now. They are perhaps more important than any of the other states, with the exception of Egypt, because Egypt is basically, as Anas said, the Iron Dome for Israel. But I think what happens in Saudi Arabia is where we have to keep our eyes on.
Could I just say one quick word before we bring in Peter to finish off? That the question about economic interests is very powerful and very important, and the role of the World Economic Forum and others having enormous influence on the World Bank and the IMF and the policies they adopt towards particularly southern countries, as well as the norm of austerity type economics all over Europe, and of course empowering global corporations. The other area which has not really been mentioned is the global arms trade. Last year, global arms expenditure was $2.7 trillion. About a third of that was by the United States. This year, it will be probably over 3 trillion. NATO countries are increasing to, as a norm, 5% of GDP, which in most cases will be a doubling of expenditure. This country is very much doing that, and Starmer is pushing that very hard. And you look at the share prices of the arms manufacturers, gone up massively, massively. And 2 weeks ago, President Trump authorized a massive arms sale to Israel, which is already very heavily supported financially by the USA. So you could almost argue it's the USA buying its own weapons in order to hand them onto Israel. And then if you've got stomach for it and you can go to these arms exhibitions, there are films and videos of the effectiveness of F-35s in bombardment of Gaza, equivalent planes in Ukraine and in Russia and elsewhere. And war is a vile, grisly, but incredibly profitable business for those that make the weapons and sell the weapons. And I've got many, many, many arguments with the British government, but one of them is at no stage, at any point whatsoever over the past 2.5 years, have they made any serious effort to bring about peaceful resolution of conflicts by understanding the cause of the conflicts in the first place and the thirst of people to be able to live free from occupation and in their own image. That is abominable and appalling. So it's up to us, as a much wider, very thoughtful group of people who are determined not to give up on the Palestinian people and always show our solidarity.
Just isn't really my field exactly. I just think that it's rather looking at individual organizations. I think it's the structural situation, economic equality, which one needs to look at. And I think that has become very profound. The different divergences in wealth and the emergence of a billionaire or even a trillionaire class now is something which nation states need to confront. And that is a left-wing project, which will be very popular with the mass of the population. I keep on talking of the Clement Attlee government, but that's what it did in 1945.
Okay, I think that's it. So I'd like to just start by thanking the panel. All four of them, in different ways, have taken significant hits for supporting the Palestinian people over the years. So thank you very much for all you do. Yeah, I will do it. And then I'd also like to thank the organizers again. That's All Books, the Cordoba Foundation, and the Muslim Community Association. And then importantly, Peter will be signing copies of his book, and you should all buy it, because buying this book is an act of resistance in itself. Just to give you a flavor of how important this book is, it's not being reviewed by one mainstream media newspaper, which shows you how important it is, because they're scared. They don't want people to know about it because it exposes them
and it exposes the people they work for in the British state. So thank you.